Hello friends, welcome back to Random Rod Shop. Well, Amazon has delivered and we've got some parts for the brake lines, so I think today we're going to see if we can finish making the fuel lines and see if we can get some brakes on this thing. Alright, so we're going to start with trying to put a fuel line on this. I've decided I'm going to run the fuel lines through an abrasion sleeve because I still got a lot of cutting and welding and stuff to do inside this bed, and I really don't want these lines to get, to get messed up with weld sparks and grinding sparks and all of that stuff. So let me go ahead and put this on. Remember, in the last video we made these oak blocks to hold the line. We're going to try to get the end of the line up to about 250, 275 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we're going to try to shove on this push lock fitting. So I'll get the camera down a little closer so you can kind of see what's going on. Maybe you can get some idea of how much force it takes to push this thing together. But all right, let me get it down there. Okay, I think I got the camera close. Let's turn this thing on. Let's see what we got going on. That's getting close. That's showing about 240, so. All right. Dadnammit, I need my glasses. Well, let me push this out. I wasn't watching what I was doing. Here. See, I didn't get the end started in the middle. I ended up rolling the end of it. Gotta get this pushed out. I get my knife. We'll cut the end of this thing off again. And we'll go get my glasses so I can actually see. Alright, I'll be right back. Okay. I had these glasses, these safety glasses made for welding. These allow me to see really good within a distance of about that much. You want to try to get that end as level as you can. I'm going to loosen this up and push this back just a little bit. There we go. All right. Let's try this again. Maybe we'll get it right this time. That's about 270, so that should do it. Well, this 5/16 line is a little more problematic. I think what we're going to do is we're going to get a punch and be able to stick in there, because this 5/16 I'm having a hard time getting it to start. All right, let me go get a punch. Okay, let's try this again. All right, that has it up there north of 250. Let's see what it looks like. Oh, well, I may not have made that deep enough. That's got to go in some more. There we go. Well, I think that'll work. Let's see, is that up there? Where's it at? Oh, there we go. Well, I think that'll work. As I said last time, I hadn't really done 5/16, done quite a bit of 3/8. 5/16's a little more wiggly. You noticed I had a punch. It's a lot harder to get the fitting started in the 5/16, so I got this punch and stuck it in and kind of expanded the tip of it there, the tip of the hose, so that I could get the fitting started. But in the end, I think that'll work. It's definitely tight. I think it's sealed. Okay, so what I want to do next is I'm going to shove this in with the 3/8 hose, because I'm not sure now that I got the 3/8 hose in there that I can get this end pushed through that abrasion sleeve with that hose in there. So I'm gonna pull it through the other way, so that I'm pulling through an end that doesn't have, or the end of the hose that doesn't have the push lock on it. And then we'll lay this thing up there and we'll figure out where we need to cut this piece off at. Then I'll bring it back up here. And now that we've done one successfully, this one, hopefully this one goes a little easier. Okay, I'll get back to you in a minute. Okay, I've got it cut off. You can kind of see that I stuck the whole thing in an abrasion sleeve. Just ordered that on Amazon. It's a flame resistant, wear resistant. It's good stuff. I'm heating up this punch so that it's a little warmer, so that when I put it in there, it doesn't suck all the heat out of the nylon tubing. Doesn't take much, or it shouldn't take much anyway. Just want it a little warm. All right, that should do it. Let's see if we can get this right the first time. Just a little hammer. Well, that ought to work. Let's see here. Yeah, there we go. Well, like a lot of things, once you figure out the process, it ain't bad. Well, I think the fuel line's done. That kind of, that wraps up the fuel system, other than we still got to figure out how we're going to put gas in this thing. So I'm pondering that right now. We're going to move the camera up front and see if we can just finish up the brake lines. I think I got all the parts. Amazon finally brought me some parts. So I think I've got all the parts to hook the brake lines up. We might as well get that knocked out. Okay, so let me move the camera and stuff. Okay, folks, we're back at it. It's a little bit later than the last time I talked to you, but I think we've managed to gather everything together and get a few chores done. Getting ready to, at this point, we need to run some brake lines, but I thought we might want to talk about the difference between drum brakes and disc brakes. So if you remember, the Tahoe has disc up front, disc in the back. The truck that I took the Hydro Boost off of had disc up front, drums in the back. Now, where that comes into play is that the combination valve I need for a disc setup is not the same as the combination valve you need for a drum disc setup. In a drum disc setup, you need an extra valve. They call it the metering valve, and what it does is it delays the action of the front brakes when you stop, right? So that the drum brakes in the back can kind of catch up, right? The movement of the drum brakes is more than just the 30, 40, 50 thousandths, whatever it is on the disc brakes. So the metering valve isn't needed in a disc setup. The other thing, and I got to admit, I didn't even think about this until I was stretching these stinking Hydro Boost lines out to make them not quite as tight. I'm going to end up having to go have some lines made. I was bragging early on that I had all kinds of room between the engine and the firewall. In the Tahoe setup, you can't get to those. I mean, you got to. Those top two bolts on the transmission are bare. You got to get underneath it with a 3 or 4 foot long extension and a wobble joint to get to those top transmission bolts. In this setup, hell, I can sit on top of the engine and I can take the bolts out of the transmission. So I was pretty happy. What I didn't realize at the time was I got that room because the firewall is 2 or 3 inches further back. Right? I guess in the way it's set up here, the firewall is 2 or 3 inches that way from where the Tahoe was. And where that comes into play is when you bolt the Hydro Boost on the firewall, it's 2 or 3 inches further back than it was in the stock setup. So I even went to the point I ordered a stock line thinking that, maybe I'd done something wrong or I wasn't thinking right, so I ordered a line off of a 2002 2500 that had Hydro Boost, thinking that was going to be right, and I get it in, and you know what? It looks just like the one it looked like the one I have before I started bending the hell out of it. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? Finally, I get hit with a 2x4. And it's like, well, that ain't gonna work. So I'm gonna end up having to make new lines for the both lines on the Hydro Boost. One coming from the power steering pump to the Hydro Boost, and one from the Hydro Boost to the steering box. That's the only way this thing's gonna lay in there and look nice. All right, that was a rabbit hole. Back to our brakes. Let me show you the master cylinder that came off of the original Tahoe, and then we'll talk about how that was different than the master cylinder that came off of that late 90s Chevy pickup that had drum brakes in the back. So I'm going to take it off the tripod here. Okay, so I'm going to try to get this in here. All right, you see those two holes right there? That is the front and rear brake lines coming out of the master cylinder. And they're the same size. On the 90s, I think it was a 96, but so we'll just call it a 96. On the 96 Chevy pickup, let me get this up here, let me get a pointer. On the 96, this port was the same size, and that went to the front brakes. This port was smaller than an eighth inch drill bit, so this one's bigger than an 1/8 inch drill bit. This one's smaller than an 1/8 inch drill bit. So, what I ended up doing was I drilled that port out on the 96 master cylinder. That just goes straight through, right? So that goes straight through into the bore. So it's not a big deal to drill that port out. The thing that is a little tricky, and I don't know if it's going to work yet. This is set up for a 3/16 line on that 96. This one's set up for a 1/4 inch on the 96, and in this case, they're both 1/4 inch. But when I drilled that out, I don't know, honestly, I don't know if I've got enough flare seating surface to seat a 3/16 line now. And given that I nicked I nicked the side of that seating surface with a drill bit when I was messing with it, I don't think a 1/4 inch is going to seat, so I'm going to try to seat a 3/16 on it. If not, that is actually aluminum, and it's part of the casting. Looks like, you know, I'm saying that, it looks like on this Tahoe that may be a brass insert, but I'm telling you, on that 96, it's part of the casting, it's aluminum. So if my line doesn't seat, I'm going to have to buy a new master cylinder and then drill it out again. Okay, and I may or may not have to drill it out. I mean, to be honest, this brake system doesn't really care whether it's got 1/4 inch lines on it or 3/16. You know, you think about it and like, well, wait a minute, it should matter. Nah, not really. Brake systems do not flow, right? So there's no frictional loss per se. There's no, you're really not worried about flow. It's kind of like, you know, let's assume that that's your brake line, or that's your brake fluid in your line. The master cylinder is going to push with a pressure here. The brake fluid's incompressible, so you're going to get the same pressure out over there. So, anyway, anybody wondering about that? Difference between 3/16 and 1/4 in a brake system. Not real sure it matters. I don't know that I've ever come across a situation. Now these newer ones that have the anti-lock brake system and stuff like that, they may actually need something. They may need the bigger lines. I don't know. This Tahoe definitely had 1/4 inch lines everywhere, and you know the accountants were kind of, if there was a chance they could use 3/16. You know, the accountants probably would have had them use 3/16. So it may have something to do with the anti-lock brake system. I don't know. I know in a normal system, that incompressible fluid doesn't care. And the amount of fluid you need to expand the caliper isn't that much. Here is the proportioning valve. Now this is a eBay, Amazon special. This is a generic proportioning valve. This one is a PV4, I think. Yeah, that's a PV4. I believe the difference between a PV4 to PV2 is you get 2 front brake ports on the 4 and you don't on the 2. If that's not right, not that big a deal to me. Okay, so here's your input. I better point with a pencil here. Here is the input from your master cylinder. Here is the rear brake port, and these 2 are your front brake ports. And on the way I'm going to set this up on the 96, the front brake port is going to be the front, and the rear brake port is going to be the back. So what I'm going to need to do is just make a little short line to go from the you know, the back brake to the back brake and the front brake to the front brake. I've got this mounted on a plate, and let me go ahead and I'll put this on the truck, then we'll get the camera and then we'll come look at it again. There we go. I decided to mount this on the inside of the master cylinder. I haven't decided whether I'm going to cut those studs off or not on those extra long bolts, because I may want to use that to mount something else too, or mount a load sharing bracket, because that brass is kind of hanging out there in midair, and it's only hanging on a little bracket. Let's see here. Can I get the? Let me see if I can get a light up in there. Let's see here. There. Well, you can sort of see it there. So I've got an L bracket mounted to where the master cylinder bolts up to the Hydro Boost, and then I just bolted my angle iron plate to the bottom of that. When this is all settled, I'll weld that angle iron plate to that L bracket that's bolted to the master cylinder just to make it all solid. But you can kind of see that brass hangs out there. My brain says that's going to flop around a little bit, so I suspect before this is all done, I'll triangulate that bracket to give it a little more stiffness. Having a hard time focusing this thing. There we go. So what we're going to do now, if I can get this around and kind of see what we got going on. So I'm going to use a piece of wire, and I'm going to kind of model where this line needs to go, and the front line needs to go in that port right there, because these are the output. These are the output for the front brakes. Let's see, there we go. Yeah, got one here, and then there's one down here. The rear brake comes out all the way at the back end. The input for the rear brake, like I said before, is this back port here, so we're going to have to get from here around to the back there. So I'm going to use a piece of wire and see if I can model that. I figure I got a snowball's chance to cut a piece of brake tubing and cut it the right length and bend it all in one shot. So we're going to use a piece of wire. Not that I could mess up this situation, but yeah, we're going to use a piece of wire. So, all right, let me put the camera back on the tripod. I'll kind of try to get it up and try to stay out of your way. Maybe you can see what I'm doing, but we'll see. one thing you got to keep in mind is you have to bend these things. So if you're bending brake lines and you're kind of in tight quarters, you always want to think about what you're going to use to bend the lines. And I don't have very sophisticated stuff, so we need to make these bends kind of wide and reasonable. Not particularly happy about that going up. I prefer it all to be downhill. That may mean I need to lower that thing a little bit just so I can get that brake line underneath there. I'd prefer not to have a high spot that's where it can trap air. That thing needs to go down probably about an inch. Okay. I wonder if I can bend that brake line and sort of use these brake lines to hold it up there about where it needs to go. I don't know. That may be a fool's quest. Let me get a pen. Alright, well, if I flare that, that's about, it may be more than an inch, but that's alright. It looks like that thing needs to go down a little bit, that proportion or combination valve. That way I can get a little more room to make these bends, because I don't know that I got anything to make bends that tight. All right, well, we'll do one at a time. I'll reposition the camera over here. Okay, so that's the front one. So we're working on 1/4 inch brake line. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, somewhere about right there. You can see how exacting I was. Now, if you made brake lines and you have forgot to put the fittings on, yeah, I'm not sure I believe you when you tell me that. Okay, let's make a brake line. This little thing is better than sliced bread, I gotta tell you. This one happens to be an Eastwood, but everybody sells these things. It's almost like a, you can't mess this up. It's got a 3-step process for a double flare. You know, you got to pick the right one. This is, just make sure I got it. Yeah, this is for 1/4" tubing. And it's got the double flare here and the DIN fitting up. I think that, yeah, that's the DIN fitting on that side. You stick it in there and, whoa! The other thing is, don't put them on there backwards. That gets real frustrating. You know, you're so proud of yourself that you remember to put the fittings on, and then you put them on there backwards. All right, so you just got to snug that up just a little bit. You go to Operation 0. Whoa. Well, I didn't set that up very well, did I? Let's turn our fang-dangle vise. There we go. Okay, set it up for Operation 0, and what that does is that pushes the die back and it flushes the tube up with the front of the die. Then you crank it down, because you definitely do not want this tube to move in that die. Then you just read the top. Let's see, Operation 1 for 1/4". Says Op 1 1/4". You pull it. Then you go to Op 2 for 1/4". Where's it at? Right there. Op 2 for 1/4". And then you pull it. Well, let's see if I was successful. Double flare. Kind of looks like it's supposed to. I'm happy about that. If you're going to do brake lines, I've made a lot of brake lines with those, you know, those flaring tools you get from everybody. You get them online, you get them from Harbor Freight, you go to the parts house, they got those clamshell. Man, those things are annoying. If you have to use one of those, the wing nuts, don't tighten it down enough. Stick the thing in a vise, clamp it down, because that's generally what the problem is that the clamping of the flaring tool on the line isn't good enough. The little ribs are kind of flaky. Anyway, if you got to use them, just remember to tighten that thing down, because that's generally where the problem is. Op 0, tighten it down. Find Op 1 for 1/4". There we go. And then Op 2. There we go. And there's the second flare. We now have a brake line. And you notice I've got this copper nickel tubing. I really like this stuff. It bends so much better than definitely stainless, but steel, and it doesn't rust away. I'm going to show you some copper tubing over here that's kind of got, yeah, it looks like it's rusted. The difference is that, man, I think I got that off eBay, and I think so that's along the same lines as that copper coated aluminum wire you can buy. You know, on Amazon, on eBay it says, you know, 15 rolls, 1,000 feet of wire, and it's copper coated aluminum. Ain't worth a damn. I think that may be the same thing. That's sort of that ain't the same line as what I've got here. This is a true copper nickel line. I think that's copper coated steel. Anyway, I had it on the floor and my big dog pissed on it, and it's rusty now. We'll find something to do with it. Okay, so let's go see what we can do about bending this. You know, I probably ought to make sure I don't get twisted around here, and I know which end's going to proportion valve, which end's going into the master cylinder. All right, help me remember. The silver end goes in the master cylinder. Yeah, we'll try the fang-dangled one and see if it works. It's so big, it's hard to get a small. It's hard to get a small flare on this thing. Or not flare, small bend. Well, I may regret this. That doesn't look like that's going to be tight enough, but we're going to give it a shot. Let's see, it kind of needs to go 90. Okay. Then we need a big sweeping one over here. Let's see. I don't know about you guys, but it is so easy for me to get twisted up in terms of bending and bend these things the wrong way. Oh, boy, I may have screwed the pooch on that one. So that's going to need to be straightened out. Just so you know, it's always easier to bend it than it is to unbend it. Well, I need some tighter bends on this side. I've got these pliers and they're made to do this, but man, I really have not had much luck with running these pliers. I don't know, maybe it's just me. Well, that's close enough to take it over there and let's see how bad it is. All right, I'll take you over there. That'd be nice if I had a cameraman. Whoa. Oh, that's what the problem is. All right, so that needs to go on the bottom. For a minute there, I was like, what did I do? Then I remembered we decided to put it on the bottom of the master cylinder. Okay, so this should screw into there. We're going to need some more twist on that. Well, that could use some more bend in it. Question is, am I brave enough to do it? You know what? I think I'm going to leave that right there. Looks like it's out of the way of anything, and I'm not sure I want to try a tighter bend than that. Alright, so that said, we're going to have to get from the rear of the valve to the rear on the master cylinders. Now let me go get my wire. Boy, that is going to be tough, ain't it? Actually, if we run it at an angle back there, that'll let me have a little bigger bend. Let's do that. Man, it's so much easier to bend this wire than it is bending brake lines. Well, I think I can make that work. One of these days, get rich and famous, I'll get a nice bender. But until then, we're gonna get by. Oh, almost made a mistake, didn't I? That back line is 3/16. Well, I'm not sure it is. What did I decide to do? No. Oh yeah. There we go. Okay, so there's the fittings. Those are 3/16. And that's because that's what I had the fittings for. And on the bottom side, it worked better for the combination valve. I just remembered my young bride found a seamstress tape for me on clearance. That might make this a little easier. Well, according to that, it's about 12 1/4, 12 1/2. Well, I wasn't that far off, was I? All right, one more time. This time we need to make sure we use the 3/16 dies. Snug it down just a little bit. Use op 0. Now we're going to do op 1, 3/16. Make sure you got it tight. Now op 2. And you don't have to crank this thing down. You can put enough force on this thing to literally squeeze that ferrule or that flare too tight, and you'll crack this stuff. So you don't have to gorilla it. Looks good. Whoa. Blowing it off helps. Make sure you got the fittings pointing in the right direction. That ought to work. Okay. Same song, second verse. Better make sure we know which end goes into the master cylinder. All right, in this case, it's the big one. So, okay, this video is getting kind of long. We're going to skip forward and I'm going to show you the brake lines in. Keep in mind that making the brake lines is easy with the right tool. You can do it with a lot of different ways. This is one of those cases where having the right tool actually does matter. Running the brake lines is just a test in patience. There's really nothing complicated. You need to get from point A to point B, and you just need to figure out the most efficient way to get there. Probably the most frustrating piece in my experience on running brake lines is putting the little clips on to tie the brake lines down to the frame rails. That just seems to take forever. So I won't bore you with that. I'm going to go ahead and do that, but first let me get the camera off the tripod and I'll show you what we got going on. So we finally got all of the lines in. So let me get a pointer here. So here's the rear brake line coming from the master cylinder, front brake line going to the proportioning valve from the master cylinder. Here's one of the front brake lines. Here's the other front brake line, and then the rear line comes around and it just heads straight back. Now, I don't know how you guys do this. I've done, in terms of putting the stress relief in the brake lines, I've done the, wrap it around a beer can and put a coil in there. Actually, a couple of times I've put a flex line in there, and in the end, I've decided these S-curves work just fine. In this situation, the inner fender bolts to this ridge right here. So the inner fender actually comes pretty close to this steering column. And so my thought is I'm going to end up building a hold off from the inner fender to kind of keep these lines here from vibrating. And then we're going to need to mount solidly the brake lines all the way along the way. Now, this one was a pain. This rear brake line was a pain because with the torsion bars in here, the brace for the torsion bars is frame height all the way across the frame. So I had to ponder that for a little bit. I ended up taking the brake line above the frame rail, which quite honestly wasn't my preference because the brake line has a hump in it, but it's not the high point of the system, so it still should bleed. We'll see when we'll see when we try to bleed these brakes. But at this point, the brake lines are all in. I actually filled this thing up with fluid last night, and this morning it still has all the, well, when I say filled up, I put fluid in it, and it's still there, which would lead me to believe that none of my lines are leaking, which makes me happy because I wasn't sure that this rear brake line was going to seat. So that makes me happy that that's not leaking there. Also, I think there's one piece I forgot to mention about this master cylinder when I was telling you about, I drilled this port out to, I think I used 1/8 inch bit. So it's a little smaller than this, but it's bigger than what it was. In addition to that, this master cylinder had a restrictor, for lack of a better term, in this back port. Let me show you what that looks like. So it had this plastic piece in there, and that hole goes all the way through, but it is really small. So basically, I pulled the reservoir off, and there was a snap ring holding that green plastic piece in there. Pulled the snap ring out. Let me see if we can get down in here. Yeah. So it was in this cast piece here. It was in the master cylinder itself. So I pulled the reservoir off, and there was a snap ring that held that green restrictor in there. Pulled the snap ring out, pulled the restrictor out, and just left it out. So in the situation we got right now, the porting for the rear section of this master cylinder and the front section of the master cylinder, as near as I can tell, are the same, which should make the disc brakes happy. Okay, what I'm going to do to kind of finish up this video is I need to connect the angle iron that's holding our combination valve to our bracket, and I hadn't really decided. It might actually be better if I just make another angle iron so it comes down all the way. I'll go figure that out, and I'll come back and we'll get this mounted. Okay folks, I think we're going to call this one a video. It's gotten kind of long. Let me show you where we ended up on the bracket. Got it painted, got it all installed. I think the brakes are done other than bolting down the line along the frame rail. I always procrastinate on that, so we're going to have to do that next time, or in between now and next time. Whatever, I don't know if you guys are interested in watching me screw holes and put clamps on or not. So let me show you where we ended up. So there's our bracket we made, and actually that's pretty stiff. I don't think I'm going to have to reinforce that at all. And I went ahead and cut the arm, or the rod that goes to the brake pedal. It's interesting. The International shifter is a gift that keeps on giving. The tube size for that International shift rod was actually the right size to go over the plunger rod on it was the same size as the plunger rod for the Hydro Boost, and the Hydro Boost was the same size as the International plunger rod. So it was like it was meant to be. Okay, next time we're going to figure out how to get a filler neck on this tank, and hopefully we're going to get this transmission cooler hooked up, because we cut 6 or 7 inches out of the front of that Tahoe frame, and the transmission cooler was in front of the radiator on the Tahoe. The lines are all a wee bit too long, kind of like the lines on the on the power steering was a little bit short. So we're gonna have to figure out what we're gonna do there. We're getting close to starting this thing. We got brakes, get a filler neck, we got fuel, got the radiator in. I gotta make the top brackets for this radiator, and then the radiator will be mounted. And I think we're getting close to see if this thing's gonna start. Okay, I appreciate you watching. Subscribe, like, hit the notification bell, do all that stuff, and we'll see you next time.